Remove it. The voice, sharp and commanding, cut through the murmuring quiet of the courtroom. Judge Peterson, a man whose tailored robes seemed to amplify his natural arrogance rather than lend him an air of judicial wisdom, stared down from his elevated bench. His gaze was fixed not on the face of the man standing before him, but on the simple, six-pointed star that lay against the old man's chest. The light caught the pale blue of its ribbon, making the words, "For valor," etched into its heart, seem to pulse. "This is a courtroom, not a parade ground. Your decorations are not welcome here." Thomas Mitchell, 84 years old, did not move. His hands, rough with time and labor, rested calmly on the worn wood of the defendant's table. His back, though bent by age, was perfectly straight. He had faced down far worse than the petty tyranny of a black-robed official. His eyes, the color of a faded sky, held a calm stillness that seemed to absorb the judge's hostility without reflection. He simply stood, his presence a silent testament to a life lived beyond the narrow confines of this room. The bailiff, a burly man with a nervous twitch, took a hesitant step forward. "Sir, you heard the judge." Thomas's gaze did not waver from the judge, a silent, unwavering force against a loud, hollow authority. The air crackled with a tension that had nothing to do with the minor traffic violation they were there to discuss. The charge was simple, almost laughably so. Thomas Mitchell had been cited for an expired registration on his vintage motorcycle, a machine he had lovingly maintained for over 50 years. He had not contested the ticket, merely requested a hearing to ask for a reduction in the excessive fine, a fine that would take a significant portion of his modest pension. He had entered the courtroom with a quiet respect for the institution, a respect that was now being systematically dismantled by the man presiding over it. Judge Peterson leaned forward, his voice dripping with condescension. "Mr. Mitchell, is it? Let me be clear. I will not have my courtroom turned into a stage for theatrical displays of patriotism. This is a place of law and order, not a VFW hall. The trinket you are wearing is irrelevant to these proceedings. I will ask you one last time to remove it, or I will hold you in contempt of court." The word trinket hung in the air, a deliberate, calculated insult. Several people in the gallery shifted uncomfortably. A young woman in the front row, a law student observing the day's proceedings, scribbled furiously in her notebook, her expression a mixture of shock and outrage. The prosecuting attorney, a man barely 30, shuffled his papers, refusing to meet Thomas's eyes. He knew the judge's reputation for arrogance, but this was a new level of judicial overreach. Thomas's voice, when it finally came, was not loud, but it carried a weight that filled the room. "With all due respect, Your Honor, this is not a decoration. It is a part of my life, a part of who I am." He spoke slowly, each word chosen with a care that showed a mind still sharp, still precise. The judge's face flushed a deep, angry red. "I do not care what you think it is. I am the authority in this room, and I am ordering you to take it off. Is that concept too difficult for you to grasp?" He gestured impatiently to the bailiff. "Sergeant, assist Mr. Mitchell in complying with the court's order." The bailiff moved forward, his hand outstretched, not with aggression, but with a deep, visible reluctance. "Sir," he began, his voice low, "please don't make this difficult." Thomas did not look at the bailiff. His eyes remained locked on the judge. "You would have this officer lay hands on an old man?" he asked, his tone even yet carrying a current of steel. "You would have him remove this medal? Do you know what this medal is, son?" He finally turned his head slightly, his gaze falling upon the nameplate on the judge's bench. "Do you, Judge Peterson?" The judge slammed his gavel down, the sharp crack echoing like a gunshot. "That is enough. I will not be questioned by you. Your personal history is of no consequence here. You are a defendant who is impeding the function of this court. One more word from you on the matter, and I will have you escorted to a holding cell." The air grew thick with a palpable sense of injustice. The small crowd in the gallery watched, a silent chorus of disapproval. They saw an elderly man being bullied, a symbol of honor being debased. The judge, blinded by his own authority, failed to see what everyone else in the room now understood. He was not just confronting a man, he was confronting a legacy. He was not just issuing an order, he was committing an act of desecration. The tension stretched thin and taut, threatening to snap. Thomas Mitchell remained still, a rock in the stream of the judge's fury, waiting for the inevitable moment when the current would have no choice but to break around him. As Judge Peterson's tirade continued, the light from the high courtroom windows glinted off the metal. For a fleeting second, the polished wood and stale air of the room dissolved, replaced by the sharp smell of smoke and the deafening roar of rotor blades. The image was sharp, a sliver of memory piercing the present. He wasn't in a courtroom, but in a field of mud and shattered trees, the sky the color of a dirty orange bruise. A young soldier, barely a boy, lay at his feet, his lifeblood seeping into the soil. Thomas remembered the weight of the boy's rifle, the feel of the muddy ground beneath his knees as he'd single-handedly held the line against an overwhelming force, shielding the wounded, refusing to yield a single inch of ground. The metal wasn't a piece of metal. It was the echo of a promise made to the fallen, a silent vow to live a life worthy of their sacrifice. It was forged in the fires of a day when valor was not a choice, but the only thing left. The memory faded as quickly as it came, leaving Thomas back in the sterile quiet, the judge's angry words a meaningless drone against the thunder of the past. In the back of the courtroom, a young man in a crisp Air Force uniform sat ramrod straight. He had been there for a minor civil matter, a dispute with a landlord now long forgotten. He had watched the entire exchange with a growing sense of disbelief that quickly hardened into cold, focused anger. He did not recognize Thomas Mitchell personally, but he recognized the metal. Every person who wore the uniform knew what it was. They knew its history, its meaning, and the almost sacred reverence it commanded. To see it so publicly disrespected, so carelessly dismissed as a trinket, was an insult not just to the old man, but to everyone who had ever served. He watched the bailiff's reluctant advance and the judge's smug, self-satisfied expression. He knew he could not intervene directly, that to do so would be to invite his own charge of contempt, but he also knew he could not do nothing. Quietly, he slipped his phone from his pocket, keeping it low and out of sight. His fingers flew across the screen, his thumbs typing a rapid, urgent message. He knew exactly who to contact, a friend of his, a captain who worked as an aide to the commanding general of the nearby military base, Fort Campbell. The base was less than 20 minutes away. His message was short, stripped of all but the essential explosive details. "Sir, I am at the county courthouse. Judge Peterson is ordering a Medal of Honor recipient to remove the medal in open court. He is threatening him with contempt. The veteran's name is Thomas Mitchell." He hit send, his heart pounding in his chest. He did not know what would happen, if anything. An aide to a general was a busy man. The message might not even be read for hours, but he had to try. He had to bear witness and sound the alarm. As the judge continued his berating, the young airman felt his phone vibrate in his hand. A reply faster than he could have ever hoped for. It was a single terse sentence. "Stand by. The general is on his way." The airman read the words and a slow, grim smile spread across his face. He settled back into his seat, his eyes now fixed on Judge Peterson. The judge had no idea. He was a man standing on a trapdoor, blissfully unaware that a hand, a very powerful hand, was reaching for the lever. The quiet hum of the courtroom was about to be shattered. 20 miles away in the hushed, orderly office of Major General Robert Kane, the commander of Fort Campbell, a phone buzzed. Captain Harris, the general's aide, glanced at the screen, his brow furrowing at the text message. He stood up a little straighter. "Sir," he said, his voice cutting through the quiet diligence of the office, "you need to see this." General Kane, a man whose face was a roadmap of a life spent in service, took the phone. He read the message once, then a second time, his expression hardening from one of mild curiosity to disbelief, and then to cold, focused fury. He looked up, his eyes like chips of granite. "Mitchell? Thomas Mitchell? Are we sure?" Harris was already typing on his computer, his fingers a blur across the keyboard. A few seconds later, he looked up. "Yes, sir. Thomas Mitchell, Sergeant First Class, retired. He lives just outside the city. His file confirms it. Medal of Honor, awarded for actions in the Mekong Delta, 1968. Kane stood up, his chair scraping back harshly. He was a tall man, and his sudden movements seemed to make the large office shrink. "Get me the base legal officer now, and have my vehicle brought to the front. We are leaving in 2 minutes." He strode over to a display case on the wall where several flags were neatly arranged. He opened it and took out the flag of a 2-star general, a flag that was only displayed on his vehicle when he was traveling in an official capacity on a matter of the highest importance. He turned back to Harris, his voice low and dangerous. "And get me a direct line to the state's Judicial Conduct Commission. I want to speak to the head of it. Tell them it's an emergency." The name Thomas Mitchell had acted as a thunderclap in the quiet command post. It was a name spoken with reverence, a name that carried the weight of legend. The idea that a man like that was being harassed, humiliated by a local judge was not just an insult. It was an intolerable stain on the honor of the uniform. Help was not just on the way. A storm was gathering, and it was about to break directly over Judge Peterson's courtroom. Back in the courtroom, Judge Peterson, entirely ignorant of the forces he had just set in motion, was enjoying his moment of supreme authority. He saw Thomas Mitchell's silence not as a sign of quiet defiance, but as the capitulation of a weak old man. He leaned back in his chair, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "So, you have finally decided to see reason, Mr. Mitchell. Good. Now, for the final time, give the medal to the bailiff and we can proceed with the matter of your fine. Or we can take the other path. I can have you escorted from my courtroom, held in a cell for 24 hours for contempt, and we can add that to your list of offenses. The choice is yours, but I assure you, my patience has reached its absolute limit." He was pushing past the point of no return, his ego demanding total submission. The fine, the initial reason for this entire hearing, was now a distant afterthought. This had become a battle of wills, and in his own mind, Judge Peterson had already won. He saw only an elderly defendant, a symbol he could bend to his will to assert his dominance over his small kingdom. He did not see the history standing before him, nor could he hear the distant, rapidly approaching sirens that signaled the end of his career. The main doors of the courthouse burst open with a force that made them slam against the marble walls. The sound echoed through the hallways and into the courtroom, causing every head to turn. 2 uniformed military police officers strode in, their expressions grim and purposeful. They were followed by a man in the immaculate dress uniform of a major general, his chest a formidable array of ribbons and medals, his 2 stars glinting on his shoulders. He moved with an aura of command that made Judge Peterson's authority seem theatrical and hollow by comparison. Captain Harris followed closely behind him. They did not pause or slow their pace until they stood in the center of the courtroom, directly before the judge's bench. The 2 MPs took up positions flanking the aisle, their presence a silent, powerful statement. The entire room was frozen, a tableau of stunned silence. The bailiff, who had been about to place a hand on Thomas Mitchell's arm, froze in place, his hand hovering in midair. Major General Kane's eyes swept the room, taking in the scene with a practiced, analytical gaze. He saw the shocked faces in the gallery, the nervous prosecutor, the arrogant and now confused judge on the bench. And then he saw the old man standing at the defendant's table, straight and unwavering, with the pale blue ribbon of the Medal of Honor around his neck. The general's posture, already ramrod straight, seemed to gain an extra inch of rigidity. He took 3 precise steps forward, stopping directly in front of Thomas Mitchell. He did not address the judge. He did not address anyone. His focus was solely on the old soldier. Then, in an act that sent a shockwave through the entire courtroom, he raised his hand to his brow in a sharp, perfect salute. "Sergeant Mitchell," General Kane's voice boomed, clear and resonant, a commander's voice accustomed to being obeyed. "It is an honor to be in your presence, sir." He held the salute, his eyes locked on Thomas's. The old man, for the first time, showed a flicker of emotion, his calm facade cracking just a little, his eyes misting over as he returned the salute with a nod. The general then turned his gaze to the bench, and the full, formidable weight of his authority fell upon Judge Peterson. The judge, who had been sputtering, trying to regain control, was silenced by the icy fury in the general's eyes. "Judge Peterson," Kane began, his voice dangerously quiet now, "I am Major General Robert Kane, commanding officer of Fort Campbell. I was informed that a United States Medal of Honor recipient was being subjected to disrespect in this courtroom. I see that report was accurate." He took another step closer. Are you aware, Judge, of who this man is? Are you aware of what this trinket, as you called it, represents? The general did not wait for an answer. He turned slightly so he was addressing the entire room. Sergeant First Class Thomas Mitchell was awarded the Medal of Honor for his actions on March 12, 1968. During an ambush in the Mekong Delta, his platoon was overwhelmed, their commander killed, and they were facing annihilation. Sergeant Mitchell, then a specialist, single-handedly defended a wounded comrade, repelled 3 separate enemy assaults on his position, and coordinated air support that saved the lives of a dozen men, all while being wounded himself. He refused to be evacuated until every one of his wounded brothers was on a helicopter. A hush fell over the crowd. The law student in the front row was no longer writing, her pen still, her mouth slightly agape. The young prosecutor looked down at his shoes, a flush of shame creeping up his neck. The bailiff had slowly, almost reverently lowered his hand and taken 2 steps back from Thomas. The general turned back to the judge. That medal is not a piece of jewelry, Your Honor. It is a symbol of courage and sacrifice that is beyond the comprehension of most men. It is awarded by the President in the name of the United States Congress. An insult to that medal is an insult to every man and woman who has ever worn the uniform of this country. It is an insult to the nation itself. Judge Peterson's face had gone from red to a pale, sickly white. His arrogance had evaporated, replaced by the dawning, terrifying realization of the magnitude of his mistake. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He had picked a fight with a quiet old man, and had in doing so brought the full weight of the United States Armed Forces down upon his head. The salute, the recitation of valor, the cold, hard stare of the general. It was a public vindication so total, so overwhelming, that it left no room for doubt about who held the true authority in that room. General Kane now stood directly before the bench, his voice dropping to a low, menacing tone that was audible only to the judge and the court recorder. Your behavior today, Judge Peterson, has been a disgrace to your office. You have abused your authority and brought shame upon this court. I can assure you that a formal complaint will be filed with every relevant oversight committee before I return to my base. I imagine the media will also be very interested to learn about the day a judge tried to strip the Medal of Honor from a national hero over a traffic ticket. He then turned back to Thomas Mitchell, his expression softening. Sergeant Mitchell, on behalf of the United States Army, I apologize for the disrespect you have endured here today. Thomas simply nodded, his quiet dignity still his most powerful shield. He finally spoke, his voice calm and steady, not to the general, but to the now trembling judge. It was never about me, Your Honor. It's about what this represents. It represents the ones who didn't come home. That's all. It was a simple statement, free of anger or malice, a lesson delivered with a grace the judge had shown he could never possess. It was the wisdom of a man who understood the difference between power and honor, a lesson that had just cost Judge Peterson his career. As Thomas spoke, the image of the medal in the courtroom momentarily dissolved, replaced by a scene from decades earlier. A young, uniformed Thomas Mitchell stood in the Oval Office, his hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the overwhelming weight of the moment. The President of the United States was placing the pale blue ribbon around his neck. The weight of the medal was heavy, but it was nothing compared to the weight of the memories it represented. It was a moment of profound honor, but also of profound sorrow. The President's words were a blur, but the feeling of the cold metal against his uniform was a sensation that had never left him. It was a tangible link to his past, a constant reminder of the price of valor. The origin of the symbol, born in the highest office of the land as a recognition of the highest sacrifice, made its desecration in this small courtroom all the more obscene. The fallout was swift and absolute. Before the end of the day, news of the incident had spread like wildfire. The local television stations picked it up, and by nightfall it was a national story. Judge Peterson was suspended from the bench pending a full investigation by the Judicial Conduct Commission. The investigation was a formality. Faced with a formal complaint from a 2-star general, dozens of witnesses, and a firestorm of public outrage, he tendered his resignation within the week. His career, built on a foundation of arrogance, had been demolished in a single morning. The traffic ticket for Thomas Mitchell was immediately dismissed, with a formal written apology from the Chief Justice of the state Supreme Court. The court system also announced a new mandatory training program for all its judges and staff on military protocols and the proper respect owed to national symbols and veterans. A few months later, a man in a simple suit and tie approached Thomas Mitchell as he was polishing the chrome on his beloved motorcycle in his driveway. It was the former Judge Peterson. He looked smaller, diminished without his black robe and his elevated bench. "Mr. Mitchell," he said, his voice quiet, hesitant, "I wanted to apologize in person. What I did, there was no excuse for it. I was arrogant and I was wrong." Thomas Mitchell stopped his polishing and looked at the man. He saw no triumph in Peterson's fall, no satisfaction in his disgrace. He saw only a man who had lost his way. "We all make mistakes," Thomas said, his voice gentle. "The important thing is to learn from them." He then turned back to his motorcycle, a silent signal that the conversation was over. He had no more to say. The apology had been offered and he had accepted it. It was time to move on. Thank you for watching this story. If this story moved you, please consider liking this video, sharing it with others, and subscribing to our channel for more true stories of unassuming heroes.